So what is the best PvP tank build? So when it comes to gearing as a tank, you have plenty of options in Throne and Liberty. And the problem is that every tank you will ask for a tank build will give you a different answer. So people who do his own builds will always theory craft their build that fits exactly their playstyle. And of course there's a lot to consider. And that's why in this video I will share with you a few different tank builds for different playstyles. 4 tank builds that I have created, but also as a comparison builds from Granton, Canon and also from Maxroll. Of course I'm sharing the builds, but I'm also explaining what is important, what you have to look out for, that you can actually adapt the builds depending on your specific playstyle and your priorities that you have as a tank. Okay, so without further ado, let's start. Okay, so all the builds that I have listed here are all endurance builds. So usually you always have 2 choices, to build endurance or evasion. Usually people tend to go early for melee evasion and then transition into endurance. Early we can just really easy build a lot of melee evasion. But later on as a tank we just have high defense values through all of our passives. We have a shield block chance which has a chance to block a part of the damage, and we also tend to stack a lot of damage reduction. And if we would build evasion, then of course a lot of those stats are not that useful, because if we are evading an attack then all those defense values are completely whatever. This is one of the biggest reasons why people tend to transition in the late game into endurance. But since people are currently getting their final builds, I will only cover here the endurance builds. Okay, additionally, we are not considering here any arc boss weapons, because this is anyways only relevant for a small amount of people. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about my 4 different builds here. So all of these builds work of course in all kind of content. But the focus for those builds are for sure large scale PvP. So I have a damage variant, a balanced variant and 2 full tank variants. Okay, but let's see and understand what are here the defining factors for the builds. Of course, one of the major differences here are the weapons. Okay, let's start with the S&S. So of course you have different choices here. First of all, you could pick the Sword, which is just an easy to get item, which gives a bunch of max HP and also strength, which is of course always a good tanking sword. And then there are also a lot of people who really highly value Nirma. Nirma is just good because of 2 reasons. First of all, it gives 8% more block chance. So in total 27%. And block chance gives us just the chance to reduce all incoming damage, which is of course insane. And secondly, the effect that you stun people with Shield Strike works also when we make Shield Strike an AoE attack, which you will always have as a tank. I sadly don't have it yet on my character, but the effect is also working on the AoE. So this is of course really strong. But what of course is a huge drawback for Nirma is that it gives wisdom instead of strength. And additionally it gives less base HP and you can't trade max HP on the weapon. And these are for sure some drawbacks that you have to consider. Then there's also the Channel Sword, but from my point of view this is more an arena weapon. The effect from the sword is not really relevant in large scale PvP and the stats are also not that good. So that's why I'm not using that in my builds. Okay, so let's come to the Greatsword. There are also some options that we have. So we have of course the classical tanking sword, the Provoking Warblade. Similar as the Carnix, it just gives us a lot of strength and max HP. Overall just a really solid Greatsword when it comes to tanking. And additionally it's also really easy to get. The second most picked Greatsword is probably the Ardentis Greatsword, which will give us just an insane damage boost. And we are talking here not about 10-20%, we are talking here more about 40-50% of the damage. The impact of base damage onto your spells is really ridiculous. If you're interested in the calculation of that, let me know in the comments. But additionally it also gives us some crit chance, which is of course also not too bad. So overall Ardentis will give us a huge damage boost for our Greatsword skills. But of course again we will lose here some max HP. Then there's also Junubo Sword, which has also high base damage, which is really nice. But if you want to deal damage you probably should go for Ardentis. Even though the stun chance is not too bad, in most cases Ardentis will be a lot better. And the last option would be the Morocco Sword, which gives you also a bunch of hit. And here I want to take the time to talk quickly about hit for tanks, because I really think building too much hit on a tank is not really good. Okay, so let me explain why. If we just put hit onto our weapons, then we will always have around 1000 hit as an SNS Greatsword player. That's just because of our passives. So if one of our enemies is below 1000 evasion, we will anyways always hit them, Because that's just how it works. If the enemy has less evasion than you hit, then you can't miss an attack. Okay, but if a player goes for melee evasion, how much melee evasion will they have? If you look at current meta builds and someone is going for melee evasion, then they will have most of the time 1.8 to 2k melee evasion. So you usually really heavy stacking melee evasion. If you just have 1k hit, then you miss 50% of your hits. Now let's say you take all your items just for hit and you might be getting to 1.5k hit. Then you will still miss 33% of all of your attacks against this target, which is still terrible. And you will lose so many defensive and offensive stats for that. And you will still not be able to kill the person. So from my point of view, as soon as you miss your attacks on an enemy, you just ignore them and you keep going. Okay, that's just my point of view. I think building heavy into hit is not good as a tank. Okay, but now we know the choices here when it comes to weapons. Now let's come to the armor. Usually you see in all builds a 2-piece general set and a 2-piece commander set. The general set gives you 150 melee heavy attack chance. This is just incredibly good as a 2-piece. Heavy tank chance is just always good. Sure, it also has some diminishing returns, but still it's just always good and you always want to stack it as much as you can. Then you have the shock commander set, which gives you for the 2-piece set 18 damage reduction. And for the 4-piece set, it gives you 10% more block chance. Block chance is of course really good because if you block more, then you will get more tanky against all type of damage. And damage reduction is of course also always good because it not only reduces the damage we are taking, but also increases the reflect damage when we are using our counter barrier. And if you played a little bit as Greatsword, then you know how funny it is when crossbow players are killing themselves when they're spinning around you. So here really the more you stack from it, the better it gets. Also important here that the chest and the pants from the commander set are also giving additional damage reduction. But what is really funny is that a lot of people are using both of these sets, but everyone is using it differently. So for example, I use in my damage build general boots and gloves. And in the balance build I use the chest and the gloves. And if you for example go to Granton's build, then you will see the helmet and the gloves. And for the commander set it's exactly the same. So everyone is doing here a little bit different, and that's because people are valuing certain stats differently. That could be because of the base stats of an item or the trade possibilities. And what you have to understand here, that it's always a trade-off. So in my damage build for example, I value movement speed really high. That's why I want to have the general boots, because they have movement speed as a basis and I can trade additionally movement speed on them. So I get 13% movement speed just from these boots. But the trade-off is that I can't have max HP as a trade on them. So I'm losing 600 health. Same goes for the gloves. If you value an attack speed really high, then you want to have the general gloves because they give you as a base a lot of attack speed, and then you can also trade attack speed on it. Okay, but important here is by choosing these two sets as a basis for your build, you are also defining what you will be weak against, and this will be magic damage. And this is because it's heavy armor. Heavy armor you can only trade melee and ranged endurance and no magic endurance. But that's just how Dawn Liberty works. You will be always weak against a certain attack type. Okay, now to understand the builds better, we have to talk about collision resistance. Because this is also really important in all of my builds. And there are currently a lot of tank players who highly value collision resistance. And one of the major reasons for that are just the tornadoes from bow players. Everyone who played already as a tank in large scale PvP knows the pain of buffing up and then being knocked up 3 times in a row from a tornado. All the buff runs out and as soon as you come back to the ground, you are immediately dead. And that's just the reason we have to go for collision resistance. That's why you see in all of my builds the same cloak and the same belt, because it gives us just additional collision resistance. And additionally, I also always will trade collision resistance on both items, as well as on the bracelet. In total you will have then almost 600 collision resistance. So you will still get knocked up in the air, but it's for sure better than if you play without any collision resistance. Okay, all the other items we are picking mostly because we want the correct stats. Because of course you want to get the right base stats. So maybe some armor combinations are not possible based on what weapons we have chosen. And that's always something we have to consider. That's why if we want to play with 70 strength, The Nirma SNS can be sometimes really annoying because it gives you wisdom, but in general for large scale it's really good to go for 70 strength. That's of course because of the additional HP, but also the additional defense that we are getting. Then the next threshold you always want to reach is the 40 perception threshold, which will give you buff duration. And buff duration is one of the best and most important stats that you can build on tanks. It will count for your counter barrier, bastion, your perfect Q block defense buff, your Da Vinci Courage, and so on. You always want to get as much buff duration as possible. The 50 perception threshold is also really good because it increases our range. And range is generally good on tanks because it makes our AoE effect bigger, which can be of course also really powerful. If you would still then have points left, I would always put them into dexterity. Okay, so these are the most important things that you need to know when it comes to gearing as a tank. So if you want to deal some damage, then my first build is something for you. You will deal really good damage, and if you are getting a good engage, you will be able to blow up people. But if you're doing a misstep, you are way less tanky than the other builds. And then you might get blown up because you have way less HP. Because if you compare that to my second build, then you will see that there's a 5k max HP difference. And that's of course huge and will make you way more tanky. So if you want to be more tanky but still deal quite a bit of damage, then the second build might be something for you. Or you just want to be a huge wall in the enemies, then my third build is something for you. But you get additional block chance from the 4-piece commander set. And additionally you will also have a lot of max HP. And maybe you're also fine sacrificing some life to get even more shield block chance and have the Nirma shield strike effect. So you would have over 50% base shield block chance, which of course makes you really tanky, and you will be able to stun people all the time with shield strike. So as you see, there's so many different options. And of course this really depends on your playstyle. But let's have also a short look on the other builds from the other content creators. So Kanon's first build is for example more of an arena build. So he's going with the Greatsword and the Fury Warblade, which gives a lot of dexterity, which gives you in the end crit chance and attack speed. And then in general he's just really highly focusing on attack speed, which is of course really good to do all of your combos faster. But you will always sacrifice something for that. And in this case, this will be tankiness. I think it's a really good build, but I think it shines more in small scale. Then we have a build from Granton, which looks similar to my damage build, but it's not focusing on collision resistance. And that's totally fine. But your playstyle need to change then. So of course you can't just play frontline with this build and run into the enemy frontline. You will get knocked up into the air and you will die. But if you play more for flanking or are more creative with your engages, this can be really good because this build will have way more damage reduction and more HP. And then there's also a build from Maxroll here from Tweekz, who's focusing more on hit, trying to achieve here the 60 perception. Additionally, he's also trying to go here for the damage variant with a lot of collision resistance. So as you can see, there are so many different builds possible. It's just really the beauty of Throne and Liberty. And it will get even a lot better if we are getting more systems in the future. When we are getting runes and all the other systems which are already in Korea. We will have so many possibilities to personalize our character depending on our playstyle. Okay, but that's it. Hopefully that was helpful and not confusing. I just love theory crafting builds and I'm interested, what are your current builds? What are you planning to go for? Will you try one of my builds? Or do you already have a build? If yes, feel free to post it in the comment section. I'll review it and give my honest thoughts on it. And the next days I will also share with you my tank simulator where you can compare builds, which in the end calculates the damage you will be getting from certain skills. If you don't want to miss that and want to support me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.